fill your thirst beside the river. Wash the journey from your hands. Feel the comfort flow inside you. Come this far, you understand.
Hi, welcome to Healing Outside the Box. I'm Rosemary LaChance, an energy healer and spiritual advisor and teacher.
And I'm Tracy Crampton, intuitive advisor.
And I am your host for this thought-provoking series, and I'm dedicated to providing you with food for thought information and answers to all modalities of alternative healing, spiritual development, and animal welfare, environmental concerns, and so much more in the form of guest speakers who are experts in their fields. This series is recorded and will be shown in your area on your local public service cable network. Please contact them for dates and times. If you have a group that you think will be interested in what we have to offer, we are available to come to your group and teach. We will give you our contact information at the end of the show. Please visit my website and click on my TV show, where you will find a wealth of information about this show.
These shows are now available for you to watch free on YouTube. Just go to YouTube and type Healing Outside the Box to make your choices. We are constantly adding new shows, so keep checking back. We are also on Facebook under Healing Outside the Box. Please like our page for the latest information about the show. We hope you enjoy the show.
All right, tonight is our show number 222, and our guest tonight is our very dear friend, Raymond Bechard. So nice to have you back again.
It's great to be back. Thank you.
Nice.
It's nice to meet
you as well.
Yes, okay. Let me give you a little bit of information about Raymond. He is an author, speaker, and human rights watchdog and activist. His upcoming book, The Hero's Handbook, is a guide for all of us to become the everyday heroes, the heroes we were all meant to be. He has also written the bestseller titled The Berlin Turnpike, here in Connecticut, a true story of human trafficking in America. He lives in Connecticut, not far from the Berlin Turnpike. Okay, so what I usually do in the beginning is ask you what made you get started on your quest for...
And wouldn't that be a great question? It wouldn't be great if I had a dynamic, dramatic answer. I don't. I have no idea, really. I've always noticed situations that just got me mad, and I just didn't want to sit around and not do anything about it. And I think now that so many of us have convinced ourselves that we can exact change or otherwise change, somehow affect positive energy in the world by simply posting something on Facebook or arguing with somebody on social media or hashtagging something and putting it out there and think, well, I've done my work for today.
Right.
You know, the world's going to be a totally different place because I just showed that person or I just did that. You know, it takes so much more than that. It takes struggle. It takes sacrifice. It takes getting out on the battlefield and getting your hands dirty. And when I work with other folks around the world who do this kind of work, you know, they're tired, they're exhausted, they're broken. But that's when you know they've really done the work. There are also so many people who, you know, like to lead a cause through their ego. You know, they get out there in front and they look terrific and all that.
Yeah, through their ego. You're right.
But
a lot of that.
you know, you can tell that they haven't been, you know, they haven't put themselves out there and put themselves at any kind of risk.
Right.
In another week or two, I'll be going down to Mexico and, you know, working with some folks there who work with refugees and the humanitarian crises that are happening there. Not only with the cartels, but with food instability and shortages of just goods that people need to get by.
Yeah. Basics, right? Just the basics that we take for granted.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
And whenever there's a situation like that, and through my research, I was able to find that whenever there's a situation where you have either extreme poverty, warfare, or economic strife and instability, you will get human trafficking. in any one of those three situations, you know, and in so
People
many
are
situations.
very vulnerable, right?
Yeah,
like, and then
exactly.
you have your
and catastrophes
survival.
as well.
I mean, it's survivalism, you know. it's
Exactly.
trying to
You were
survive.
telling us before we came on about a problem with Facebook, about how
Yeah.
they promoted this human trafficking. Would you
Well,
like
they
to tell
didn't
them
actually
about that?
promote it.
Well,
They
how they were advertising or
It went
whatever.
under the radar.
They went
Yeah, under the radar,
So
right.
Facebook has, you know, you can join a group on Facebook. You know, you have your own personal page, you have the restaurant you might like or your church, but there's also groups you can join, and that can be, you know, camping groups or dancing, whatever. But they also have what's called secret groups, so you don't know they're there, you can't search them, they won't show up in a search. And they've done, these secret groups have been, at least in the early days, have done some really great, some amazing things. The Arab Spring, when that started, really started through Facebook secret groups. People would join them in Egypt and find out when the rallies were, when protests were going to happen, and that's how they communicated. And, you know, I remember NPR doing an interview with one of the leaders of the protests back then that said, well, you know, this Arab that we thought then was going to be a permanent solution, you know, where's the next protest that's going to start? What's the next country it's going to start in? And the man from the Middle East answered, ask Mark Zuckerberg. He's got the key to the safety box where these secret groups are. Well, these secret groups also held the ability for pedophiles who had been hiding in deep in the shadows with, you know, collecting illicit images of children for years alone. And that's not something that happens in distant places. We had a doctor who was a pediatrician at St. Francis Hospital for decades. And, you know, when he passed away and his house was sold, the couple that bought his house, they were renovating, and some of the walls in the room, this is here in central Connecticut, didn't make sense, and they realized that these two walls were false walls. So they broke it open, and there were tens of thousands of images of children that he had taken over the years, and they just spilled out in slides all over the place. So this happened. But you know, this is the typical scenario. It's hidden away in the basement. Facebook made it possible for people like that to trade these images with children all over, with other pedophiles all over the world openly, and using these images as currency. So when I was working with a group that was investigating this, people all over the world, here in the United States, most and many in Europe, and we were reporting these images to the police. They were reporting it to police in Europe. I was reporting it to here in America. And I would wake up every morning with an email saying, here's the sites, here's the Facebook pages you have to report, here's the galleries you have to report to the FBI and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So I was like, well, I got to contact Facebook and see what they're doing about this. And first of all, of course, they denied it, and they said, if you see anything like that, we have a reporting system, you're supposed to report it to us. Just do that, we'll handle the rest.
Right.
And these are illegal images. I mean, just having them online is a crime. And I asked them, I said, name another crime in which I'm supposed to report it to a corporation instead of law enforcement.
Yeah, let's sweep that under the rug.
And they were like, well, we report it to the law enforcement. I said, why is it here in the first place? So I got into a very big argument with them. They said they had solved the problem. I was finally on a phone conference with them where they could, teleconference, where they could actually see my computer screen. And some high-ranking folks at Facebook, this is several years ago, and while they're telling me they've solved the problem, I'm showing them on my screen, live on Facebook, these images still coming up.
Wow.
One of them was incensed. They just were absolutely just very angry with me. I'm very surprised they let me ever use Facebook again. But what we were able to do is I was able to gather on the causes.com platform a 1.5 million followers from around the world who are also incensed by this, a 400,000 signature petition directly to Mark Zuckerberg. And eventually Facebook started to take action and use a better screening process and not let these things happen in the first place.
Good.
They were very, very resistant at first. Even working through Congressman Larson's office, when they contacted Facebook, they were very resistant. Because by acknowledging it, by addressing it, that means they were acknowledging it was there.
Yeah.
So, of course, now we know, Facebook's come under a lot more scrutiny than I was able to put on them. But at least through that effort, we were able to get them to change. And now they have people who work with internet crimes against children, law enforcement all over the world, in their offices all over the world. So they've really stepped up and addressed it. So, you know, and doing that and then enacting legislation, getting legislation here in Connecticut and in other places and in Washington as well, especially when it came to, you remember the Hartford and New Haven Advocate newspapers,
Yes.
Fairfield
Yes.
Advocate newspapers, which were owned by the Hartford Courant, which was owned by the Tribune Company, now called Trunk. And in the Berlin Turnpike, one of my books about human trafficking, a trial that took place here in Connecticut, a federal trial, the first of its kind in the United States, the pimp, the human trafficker in that trial, used the Hartford Advocate as his singular source of advertising for the girls. It was mentioned 60 times in the trial itself. And even after the trial ended, after the Department of Justice had proved these escort ads that these newspapers, the Hartford Advocate, had in the back of their newspaper every week, they didn't remove them. No one asked them to remove them. No one made a move. And so finally,
That was their livelihood.
it was so
That's
much
how
money
the
to
paper stayed alive.
So we started taking out ads right there, and right in the middle of them saying, if you need help, call this number, the National Trafficking Hotline number. And you know, that's when I started getting weird phone calls in the middle of the night from idiots. You know, what are you going to do? So we wrote a little piece of legislation, and I brought it to some of my legislators that I've gotten to know over the years and said, here, why don't we make publishers responsible if their advertisements lead to the trafficking of a minor? And people fought it. I mean, they just fought it, but it somehow passed. It was First Amendment rights. And I remember very clearly testifying before the Judiciary Committee, and one of the state representatives said, well, doesn't this infringe on First Amendment rights? It's a newspaper, it can do whatever it wants. And I said, well, this is commercial
paid
advertising,
advertisement,
so it's a
right.
different, I said, but here's the other thing. The Trafficking Victims Protection Act that was passed in 2000 was meant to literally be an extension of the U.S. Constitution, the 13th Amendment. So we know these ads have already violated the
There's
Constitution
a history,
and that their freedom. But you're saying we shouldn't pass this other one because people might not be able to advertise whatever they want. Well, somehow that law passed. It went into effect in October of 2012, and 2 weeks later, the next issue, the Hartford Advocate stopped running those ads, and in less than a year, the Hartford Advocate no longer existed. They depended so much on this
Isn't that
money.
terrible?
Yeah.
Jeez.
So people started saying, well, how'd you do that? And I didn't know. I don't represent a group. I don't, I just did it. I just wanted to, it made me so mad. It just didn't make any sense that these ads were there, that Facebook was doing what they were doing, that I just sort of thought, okay, how can I alone from the background do this? And over time, I started to develop strategies for doing it. So this latest book that I've come up with, there's actually two books. One is the Hero's Handbook, which is really it's really a study of what makes someone a hero, what characteristics.
Here we go.
are
We're up
there
on the
to be a hero.
monitor with them. There it
Right.
is.
And
That's a
this is
different one.
actually the guidebook that goes along with the Hero's Handbook.
Okay.
So one is sort of like, here's what a hero is. And it's really
Right.
a lot of stories of heroes that have affected change throughout world history recently that we've never heard of before. Stories that I couldn't believe we weren't taught in school. Just people have just
I think
saved
people have
lives
like
and-
a Marvel comic image
Exactly.
of heroes.
People who've done things that are far more, glorious, really,
Right.
than anything you'd see in the Marvel or DC universe. So, what makes someone a hero? There's no book on that. So that's the book that is coming out
That's
soon, the
very
Hero's
good,
Handbook. It's
yeah.
just, if you want to be a hero every day, this is the things you do. These are the things you can do just in your life. The one time, and one thing about heroes is they don't self-identify, and you'll often see that when someone speaks with veterans. Well, look, you were a hero. Well, I don't know about that. Other people in my platoon were heroes,
Right.
or they'll never self-identify. the one time in my life I felt not
almost
like a hero,
symbolic
but kind of
that
like,
in
okay.
comics they do wear a mask, you know.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
like
they won't
they're
identify
not-
themselves.
yeah.
That's a very good point.
Yeah.
You
Yes,
know?
it is.
Yeah, no one knows Peter Parker is Spider-Man. No one knows that Bruce Wayne is Batman.
Batman.
They hide their identity. So the one time in my life I kind of felt like, okay, I did something.
Right.
That was actually real. I was flying to Israel. It was a long, I thought, gosh, it must have been a 10-hour flight. And it was warm on the airplane. I sat next to two folks, older folks. This had to be, oh gosh, in the mid-90s. And they both had Eastern European accents. And they were going to Israel. They were both Jewish. And I said, after talking to them for like 2 hours, I said, where were you during the war? And at first, the wife said, we were in Europe. I'm like, okay, if you're Jewish in World War II in Europe, that's not, Okay. So after a while, she opened up about it. I said, her name was Inga. I said, Inga, where were you really? She said, oh, they had us in so many places. We were moved in Auschwitz and Dachau and Birkenau. I'm like, so she just opened up. She was very uncomfortable. She was sitting in the middle seat. She was hot. It was warm, so hot on the plane. So we switched seats, and I got her water, and I got her a cold towel, and I basically became her valet for the next 8 hours on this flight.
Just to hear the story.
At the end of the flight, she just held my hand. She said, Ray, you are the best. And I was like, I can die happy. It's just, because this person
You
who's
gave her the
witnessed the
voice,
greatest
right?
crime in history, I made her day a little bit better. So, okay, all that to say, so there's a way we can always be, and if you look for it, if you actually, and you both study and teach energy, and if you look and try to manifest opportunities to help people, to serve, to be a hero, in even a smallest way, and there's the story, the quintessential story of someone helping someone across the street, or just someone on an elevator, anything. They're so easy
It's like
to
a
be
million
hero.
and one of these
There's so
small
many-
gestures
if
every
you
day,
look for
right?
them. So that's
right.
what that's what the Hero's Handbook is about. It's about looking for ways and being inspired to be someone's hero, even if it's one. I worked with a drug rehab place in Hartford many years ago, and it was a great ministry. And I did some great, wonderful projects with them, helped them out with their communications and some fundraising, helping them become sustainable. A couple years later, I'm walking into a Stop and Shop in Old Saybrook, and this gentleman stops me and says, "Oh, I remember you. I was just about to leave that program." I said, I had given up on it. I said, I didn't care about my wife and kids. I was just going to leave and get high. And you just said this and this and this to me. I didn't remember this guy at all.
Yeah.
And he goes, yeah, man, if it weren't for you, I'd probably still be out on the streets. I'm not doing this to say, oh, I'm the greatest thing.
Right.
But what I'm doing is saying, you never
never
know.
know, right.
I had no recollection of this guy. I mean, of doing this, but you can make a difference in people's lives every day if you look for it. But we've become so addicted, many of us, to the vitriol and the argument and the conflict. I've done a lot of studying, a lot of writing on how we've become addicted to conflict in our lives
Yes,
now.
you're
If we
right.
look at entertainment, if we look at the news, if we look at reality shows, any reality show, they'll build in conflict because there's something about the adrenaline rush we get in our
Love
brain.
the drama.
We
Drama,
love
drama,
the
drama. Oh, boy.
And recently I saw a phenomenal graphic that someone had done after a long study, I think it was out of Harvard, that showed the standard of living, the global standard of living throughout history, throughout recorded history. And until about the late 1800s, the standard of living is very, very low. In fact, the vast majority of the population, above 99% of the population, worried every day about basic, just survival,
Yeah.
just making it through that day. Food, safety, place to sleep, not getting sick and dying. That was like it for
Right.
all of recorded history. And that's how our brains kind of evolved. And with this, and this is a theory I'm coming up with. I'll let you both see what you think about it.
Okay.
So our brains sort of evolved with this survival fear mentality.
Right.
Okay. So between late 1800s and certainly during the next 20, 30, certainly after World War II, and continually to today, the poverty rates have gone down, education has gone up, access to information, travel. With the vast majority of the population now no longer has to worry about daily survival at all. It's just not something we think about. But here's my theory. Our brains evolved with that need to fear.
Right.
And I think we are sometimes drawn to that, whether it's by our leaders or by entertainment or by media.
Yeah, they know
that we
the key to motivate us.
We create conflict in our brains somehow, because that's what we're just, our DNA is accustomed to. We're accustomed to that survival mode. So when we don't have it, we create a scenario where we might not survive. True. So given all that, I digressed a little bit. The Hero's Handbook talks about ways to get away from all that, to push aside conflict, because right now we live in a culture, in a society where solutions, where cooperations, where compromise are not the end game. The end game now is the conflict itself, is to keep the conflict going.
Keep it going, yes.
And to heighten it, because you always have to heighten that thing you're addicted to get that rush, and to keep control, to make the fear worse, to make the situation worse, to make the crisis worse. Everything builds and builds and builds.
Everything feeds the pendulum, whether you're, the one who's on the soapbox or the one who's fighting the one on the soapbox. It still feeds the same beast, essentially, right?
So my thinking was, it's like the movie War Games. The only winning move is not to play the game. So and maybe many of us did, but I used to actually get engaged into discussions with people on Facebook back and forth. But changing somebody's mindset in that scenario is like asking someone who's been a true believer in Christianity all their lives to suddenly just say, no, you should be a Muslim. Or someone who's been a believer in Islam all their life to say, no, you should be a Christian. It's not going to happen. So why would you argue ideologies? If you're arguing ideologies, you're not. It's not a discussion. It's an argument.
Right.
It's a conflict.
Agreed.
So my thinking with the book is to go around all that, to simply look for solutions, and not broadcast them, not say this is what we need to do. We need to be outraged. We need to look for solutions. Is to just make them. Just do them quietly. Do them any way possible. Even if it's in very small ways, to improve people's lives, to lighten their burden a little bit, because we all are. So that's the Heroes.
I think a lot of people stand behind this idea that awareness is everything. Let's get our voices together and draw awareness to a situation, right?
Yeah,
but they're not actually
exactly
doing anything. Yeah.
And I make the point in the Berlin Turnpike. If you remember the BP oil spill back in the summer of 2010, we all watched that camera shot of the oil being pushed out of that broken pump in the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. We were all aware of it, but our awareness didn't stop the oil from being pumped out. That took people actually going in there and getting things done.
Right.
Granted, the awareness put pressure on them, but the pressure was there already. They knew they were in trouble. So awareness alone, awareness is great.
Right.
it
But
is. You have to have it.
It is not the solution.
What's next?
It's a small step.
Right.
Exactly. I mean, I can be aware that there's a house burning next to, or as I'm walking down the street and I hear screaming inside. I can get everybody aware of it, but somebody's got to go in and get the people.
Right.
Somebody's got to go in that burning house. So that's what the Hero's Handbook is. The other book that you've been putting up here on the screen.
Yes, let's put the other. This is the first book that
was
the first book?
The Hero's Handbook.
No, I mean the Berlin Turnpike.
Berlin Turnpike.
Was that your first, or?
Oh no, I've written a few before that.
Oh, okay, all right.
But I writing about and working in the area of human trafficking for all these years, I really kind of wanted to do something a little bit lighter. I mean, both in its weightiness
to empower people
and the light. Exactly. So the other book, which is Change Our World, is an actual step-by-step guide. What do you do? How do you walk into your how do you best communicate with your state and federal representatives? How do you best engage with corporations to get them to change? And how do you, I mean, we've heard a lot of things about political action committees, super PACs, and you know, very wealthy people who, you know, buy millions of dollars worth of advertising. Super PACs for people, individuals like us, can be very, very powerful tools to which you can affect change. I explain how to establish one and how that works. And how to communicate, again, even with your federal representatives, House representatives and senators, Congress people and senators. And I found that you can just walk into their offices.
Right, you can.
And people don't know that you can go to Washington
and have a conversation.
And if you walk into a senator's office, there's 2 people in the room, they're typically answering emails, and you say, I have this, I would like the senator, or can I speak to the person on the staff who handles this issue?
Right.
And they're, you know, I don't hire awful people, they hire really smart people. If you're working in a senatorial office in a Hart building in Washington D.C., you got it going on. And I've walked in, said, I'm this person, I wrote this book, I'd like to talk to whoever's on the staff handles this issue. And someone comes out in a couple minutes and they've spent an hour or 2 with me, like no appointment. Now, I'm not suggesting that's going to work every time. Sometimes it's like, okay, great, thank you very much. Then you go over to the next office and you go again and again and again. Writing letters is great, writing an email, okay, but showing
something
up.
About a personal
there's
connection.
something about just showing up to have a civil discussion that has lost its, people just don't think about it anymore.
Right.
You know, it's either we got to get a whole bunch of people, get a bunch of
Sign a
signs,
document.
have a huge march, get on TV, and that's going to be great. Well, if you go and talk to somebody, you can kind of say, what's important to you, the representative? You know, how do we best do this? Here's a real problem. Here's a way to solve it. And for instance, one of the things that came to light in the past couple of years, especially here in Connecticut, cases of child trafficking here in Connecticut, of course, are reported to the Department of Children and Family Services every year. So they finally have some statistics going back a few years now to see trends. And of course, the trends of reports are going up because people recognize it now. They realize it's not child prostitution or something. There's no such thing as child prostitution. It's human trafficking if it's a child. That's a victim by law, and by the very nature of it, it's a victim. So when we looked at the statistics of what the background of these young people were, minors who were commercially sexually exploited, the majority of them, and I'm talking over 60%, came from homes that were parent or guardian homes. They weren't in the system, they weren't in foster care, they weren't in juvie.
Oh, wow.
And right, which I know.
That's shocking. Yeah.
It surprised me, and then this person who was showing me this information, he said, do you know why? And I was like, oh, I probably should, but I didn't. And when they explained it to me, I went, oh, well, there's the next fight I got to get into. Because the kids in the system are educated as to
how to look for,
how to recognize when they're being recruited for human trafficking, the dynamics of what pimps and human traffickers do to get them recruited in. Kids in schools, we don't teach that in Connecticut. The only state that does is California.
So there's just
there's a lack of knowledge. So there's a clear case where the lack of knowledge, the lack of information, is putting young people at danger. There's so many organizations that have written good curriculum, schools won't let it in because it was like back in the day. Remember when sex education started?
Yeah.
They're like, oh no, if we teach kids about sex, they'll start having it.
I've seen this firsthand because
Yeah.
I've worked in a school system at an alternative school that was for children with behavioral, struggles. So they would have special programming. They'd have special people, people come in and educate them on, especially on proper use of social media and bullying on social media. And these were at the time not the same, educational platforms that were being
in regular schools.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But so those kids were being made more aware of the problem and how to protect, because
It's true.
So one of the things I'm working on now is making it necessary for this curriculum to be taught in schools, so that young people will recognize that. You got to remember, many of the young people, especially who get recruited into human trafficking, do so because they haven't, for some reason, there's an emotional hole. There's an emotional void there, for whatever reason. Parenting isn't what it used to be. And now, but we say that, but parenting hasn't been what it used to be for a couple of generations now. So now we're talking about kids who have been parented by people who weren't parented. So it's multi-generational, this lack of institutional knowledge of how to parent someone. So there's this, in many young people, that's why it's become so easy to recruit them, there's this emotional void. Along with social media, you've got a perfect storm. So when somebody comes along and sees their photos on Instagram or Snapchat or, a whole bunch of websites, older folks like us don't, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we don't.
don't know about.
No.
And says, you're gorgeous, you're beautiful, all this. That's reality to them. Reality to them is on their devices.
And I remember when my children were young, being able to monitor all of that. And now that they're teenagers, it's just, there's no way to monitor it. They all have their individual devices and their Snapchat and things like that where information just disappears immediately. Yeah. Like you could never even pick up a phone and see what's going on their phone.
Yeah.
And
there are, and so there's that ways, there are those methods of that human traffickers could recruit young people. And I say young people, I mean males and females. It's almost evenly split now.
Wow.
Yeah, very much so. But there's also sites where a young person can, say they get home from school at 2:30, the parents are home at 4:30.
Yeah.
They can go on their phone, they can sign onto an account on websites I won't mention, and they can do whatever the men are telling them to do on that site and get paid for it.
Oh, yes.
So they're not even in the room.
Right.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, exactly. So a couple of years ago when we passed some legislation here in Connecticut about paying a commercial, how do I explain it simply, when someone pays a minor for a sex act, that's a felony in Connecticut. Oh. My argument was the law says they have to basically be in the room with them. And my argument was, well, whether or not they're paying, if they're paying to do a sex act and they're somewhere across the world, it's still an adult paying a child to do a sex act. That should be illegal. That's not illegal in Connecticut now.
Wow.
So if someone is paying and using one of these sites to pay a 13-year-old in Tennessee to do something on camera, that's not illegal. Yeah. So there's child pornography laws are breaking, but as far as the commercial, they could be much, So these sites are up there. The young people know they're up there, and they're either getting paid money or they just have an Amazon wish list.
Right. And would that be a gray area too? Like if you're not being handed physical money or currency?
So that has a gray area that has to be addressed
just giving you a gift,
right? Any commercial exchange of money or goods.
Okay, good.
But sometimes, of course, in many instances, it's money, goods, or it's rent or food, or especially drugs. We have an opiate epidemic this year. Last year, in 2017, more people died of opiate overdoses just in Pennsylvania than all American military have died since the beginning of the War on Terror in 2001. Just in Pennsylvania, just in 2017. Opiate epidemic.
You're going to tell us why now, right? Why?
Why? Well, yeah, because drug companies pushed OxyContin on us forever.
Yes,
and then the cartels brought in really, really powerful, cheap heroin to places like Vermont and rural places and just spread it everywhere.
Oh.
And I've seen this, even before the Oxy, I think that children for ADD, they're put on the Ritalin, they're used to the stimulant, so it starts even there. It starts with those stimulants, as a 5-year-old to keep them from wiggling in their chair. And then Adderall, and then the Oxy, and then the heroin.
That always gets me.
It's such a predictable
such a predictable. Yeah, exactly. And so much money's being made on it. And once an industry is built around something, money's being made on it, whether it's the military-industrial complex, the pharmaceutical complex, or the illegal drug trade. It's really hard to shut something like that down. Incredibly hard. So now we've got people dying of an opiate epidemic. It's very, very easy to get addicted to the drugs, the illegal drugs they have now. They're designed to be instantly addictive. So if you've got a place like Vermont that has really, it's one of the ground zeros of the opiate epidemic. It started, 5 or 6, well, more so years ago. And
They do it out there because they don't have so much knowledge. Is that why?
well,
In the country,
I mean,
areas?
I'm not going to
find an
pretend to
answer?
know.
Oh,
I really don't know.
okay.
It's really cheap. And yes, there is a little bit of, well, this is Vermont, that's not going to happen here. Or this is Connecticut, human trafficking isn't going to happen here. That's why I knew, in writing the Berlin Turnpike, if I could write that about Connecticut and prove that here it's always been, and the first reports of it I found, went back 100 years, that it would work to communicate this problem around the country, because you've been to other places in the country. You say you're from
Right.
Connecticut. Everybody thinks Connecticut is all Greenwich.
Right.
So
Yes, I've read that. Uh-huh.
So I wanted to get rid of and I still have.
Well, I'm
people
from New Jersey, and
Oh, there
everybody
you-
thinks all of New Jersey
It's
is
a highway.
Newark, or you know what I mean. So I have the
exit?
flip side.
Right,
of it.
exactly. So it's just that I had to get rid of that. We don't even have to look for it here because we
Right.
know it doesn't exist here. Well,
Yeah.
that's the perfect scenario for somebody to come in and push it. Well, at the same time, you had this opiate epidemic of people creating heroin addicts in a place like Vermont. You had Canada, which struck down all of their laws against prostitution. The Supreme Court did. So prostitution, for the most part, in Canada is legal.
Wow.
But human trafficking, of course, can hide very easily within that. You
Yeah.
don't know if somebody's being forced to do that or if they're
If
doing it
that's
of their
by
own volition.
choice, right.
So I don't know if you've ever seen the border between Vermont and Canada. It's not like the border between, Southern California and
yeah.
Tijuana. It's not. It's basically a line across the road in some towns.
Right.
So one of the most underreported stories is now this sex tourist trade that isn't going to Costa Rica or Thailand. It's just going to Montreal and Quebec City and Toronto.
Wow.
Because men can just go up there and get whatever they want,
right.
and
Wow.
without with impunity.
Such
so-
a long border.
And that's a really
right.
long border.
Can't
Yeah,
build a wall for that one.
Oh, yeah. They'll still dig tunnels just to get to the girls.
Yeah.
So that's why the two books are sort of together. I wanted to write one to say, here's what you do every day, but here's the real, if you really want to put your life into this, here's what you have to do. And I was going to say empower somebody, but recently somebody
A different
stopped
one,
me from using the word empower, because empower means to give somebody power, and that implies they didn't have it.
Right.
They do. So it's
They had it all along, I just didn't-
they had it all along.
Yeah.
I wanted to give people a way to utilize their power, the
Right.
power that they already have, to channel it and to actually make it effective.
Yeah.
And rather than just getting in an argument every
And
Thanksgiving
sometimes
over the table.
I think a lot of times people feel so helpless. They, want to do something, but they don't know,
Yes.
what's
Yeah.
the right.
Yeah.
Not that there's right or wrong course of action. Like, you should just hopefully act in the way that you feel is the next best step.
Yeah.
Essentially, which is probably how you figured it out. Like you said, no one told you, no one gave you a
I
guidebook.
made a lot of mistakes along the way,
Right.
and that's and I wasted a lot of time and a lot of money and running around and just a lot of trips to Washington that didn't
Right.
it's a 6-hour drive. It's there's a couple days I'll never get back. So you're right. It's a very good point. I wanted to give people a way to stop wasting their time and really use the power that they already have.
I think that's a fantastic idea. I really do.
Well, thank
I
you.
hope that they will. It's in print now, right? It's ready to.
It will be soon,
Will
and
be
that's
soon.
why we have that kind of goofy
Let's-
graphic. It might look a little bit different,
Oh,
but
the,
Yeah, let's
Our
show the two
changing
books that
world,
he
right?
has up there on the monitor. As soon as they get up on the monitor, we'll show him the Berlin Turnpike that he can buy.
that's been in print
I
for
think-
quite some
and-
time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they did show that
And
just
we,
a little
um,
while ago.
I
They
revised.
did show it before?
Oh,
I
yeah.
didn't see it. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I revised that. I had to revise that because that story
is
just
good.
There it
continues.
is.
The story that's told in the Berlin Turnpike and all the people who were here in Connecticut, it just, one of the girls that I knew very, very well who was a victim, I worked with her for 8 years. She became a dear friend, passed away of an overdose 2 years ago this Friday. And so, there's things, and other people got arrested, and other people, one of the people involved was a state trooper, and so The book is the Berlin Turnpike itself has been revised.
When you were on the show that time and you talked about the two girls and you had their pictures up and everything.
Yeah, that's right.
That was so heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I mean,
That
we
was
were
tough.
in tears here. It was just so heartbreaking.
Yeah, I still.
You made them come alive to everyone, I hope they catch that on YouTube because it was a wonderful show.
No, thank you. Yeah,
You've done so much wonderful work.
Well, thank you.
That's why we have you here all the time because we just think you're just so great.
Wonder if they could show your more recent book, right?
Yeah, he did. The new one, yeah.
Oh, okay.
They did. They had it up there before.
Yeah,
there it is.
Yeah,
So it
change
kind of
overall.
actually looks like a government report. It probably
Doesn't
won't
look
look
like,
like
yeah.
it probably won't look like that when it comes
the way
out.
the world
but,
looks.
It's pretty well finished, and I'm excited about it because I think it's going to surprise a lot of people.
There it is.
Because it really gives them tools they didn't know that are just very easy to establish and use. And it's like, here's what you do. Here's, just making, getting a bunch of followers or starting a GoFundMe page or just, that's great, if an emergency or something like that. But there's things you can do to affect long-term change. It talks about how to talk to legislators, without just, to get them to listen to you, to compel them to listen to you. And it's like any other relationship. You have to find out what's important to them.
Right. You have to speak their currency.
Speak their currency and go that way.
Right.
It's not like you, as an individual, we can walk into the state capitol or go to Washington and say, I'm going to change this place all on my own.
Yeah, right.
No.
People think they have to do these big things.
No,
and you're telling them little bit things, little add up to a whole lot, and you never know what's going to happen.
Exactly.
That's what's so wonderful. You wouldn't think that would be.
Yeah, I know.
A little thing like that, right?
A little thing like that,
It's
exactly.
just wonderful. Every day, everyone can do little things like that.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
on a previous show, you had mentioned how a lot of these women who were in the trafficking, once they're adults, they don't have the services. I've seen that firsthand.
Oh, my God.
And I think that
just
goes across a lot of different. A lot of different populations,
That's true. They
children
age
with
out.
disabilities,
Yep.
they age out, and then the funding's not there, the support's not there.
As soon as they become 18,
right.
it's just gone. And the vast majority, especially those caught in the commercial sexual exploitation and human trafficking, we hear so much about child trafficking. It is a problem, absolutely. But because that gets more media attention, it gets more donation, it gets more people listening to populations, the focus is put so much on that. But quite frankly, the vast majority of victims are adults.
Adults, right.
And the vast majority of them get
Or they
arrested.
become adults.
Or they become adults,
and they
right.
still have
and they still think of that, or
the
they
scars,
still in the life.
right?
Exactly.
They still have the scars to deal with.
So it's horrible the way it works and how people take advantages of really bad opportunities.
Yeah.
For instance, when we had that very early blizzard in 2011, the Halloween, it was a few days before Halloween, and much of the state was without power. And we had linemen coming in from all over the country to fix the electrical grid here in Connecticut. Well, Simsbury, Connecticut, had their first prostitution arrest ever. Like, I called the police department. I said, when was the last time you guys arrested someone for prostitution? They said, we haven't.
Yes, yes.
So it was
Yes.
a woman who came up from New York, and she was operating out of a lovely little place in a hotel, a small little hotel in Simsbury, right on Hop Meadow. And the hotel owner was vigilant and called the police and said, there's too many people going in and out of that room. Something ain't right. So they arrested this woman and looked into her background, and she had been previously arrested for selling an 11-year-old girl in New York City. So I thought to myself, I talked to the cops, and they said, well, yeah, it's the linemen. They know the linemen are here.
That's right, all
They're
the
away
men
from
are
home.
there,
They got all this money. They got all this
Yeah.
time when they're not on duty, and they're all staying in hotels.
Yeah.
And what I started to do is when they started to predict hurricanes coming, where there'd be mass electrical outages, when Backpage was going, Backpage was a big place for escort ads. Craigslist was a big page for escort ads. I started to look at these areas and the numbers of escort advertisement. By escort, I mean prostitution, sex for sale, which was very open. And I would measure how many ads were up in a particular area that was going to be hit by a hurricane and have mass electrical outage, predictable.
Yeah.
And
Flood.
afterwards, in every case from 2011 until they took down Backpage the last April, these areas would go up, the ads would go up by at least 75%.
Wow.
And so we have the statistics for that. But then you go to the disaster community, the people who work in disaster relief, and say, hey, here's this thing that happens. Here's how to recognize human trafficking, because it's going to be here more than everybody else. You're going to hear it every year it happens, the Super Bowl. Everybody talks about the Super Bowl being the biggest human trafficking, event in the world.
Really?
And, yeah, I dropped my. Good thing these are made of environmentally friendly.
Yes.
I thought the same thing, but I didn't.
No, they don't break. They just never go away. And it drives me nuts every year that they talk about the
Super Bowl.
The Super Bowl being this huge human trafficking event. Well, there's a couple things wrong with that. Yeah, the police get more vigilant because they make more prostitution arrests because people come in and say you got to look for this, so they make more arrests. But the thing is, what does that say about football fans? Like, let's all go to the Super Bowl and buy children. It's just this, and not to mention the fact that there's other football games that happen. There's the World Cup that happens. There's soccer and everything. It's crazy. What they're ignoring completely is the fact is whenever there's a mass catastrophe, a hurricane, and mass power outages, and you see when was it Hurricane Irma? God, there's been so many. But in September of 2017, the one that hit Florida, I went down there afterwards to work disaster relief in the agriculture area. But prior to the hurricane hitting, I was driving in Old Saybrook on 95 North, and there were already trucks, electrical repair trucks from Maine, from New Hampshire, from Massachusetts, heading south on 95 in Connecticut. They were all going there from all over the country. And so were the pimps with the people to sell.
Wow.
And that's hard to get people to listen to, even though we've got the statistics.
Yeah, they
to
don't
back
ever
it up.
think about that. I didn't think about
I
that.
wouldn't have thought about it.
No.
Nobody has. So
No.
so this is a typical scenario where I'm like, okay, who do I go to get to listen to this? It's kind of a strange thing. You have to look for the voices of influence that will listen to you, and then affect change through them.
Start having educational forums with the electrical work,
Well,
with the linemen, okay,
yeah,
I'm coming in for a conference.
Well, it's the people who had to recognize it. It's really working with law enforcement and Red Cross and other people who could recognize it and say, then say, to the
Educate the work.
Educate them as to what's really going on. So, and people also ask me, how is this finally going to end? Well, it's mostly a male problem. It's mostly men that cause the problem. It's mostly men that buy both males and females for sex. There's no statistics that show what that percentage is, but it's a lot.
So how do we raise men to give the mothers out there some tips?
I know. The thing is, if the problem comes from the men, the solution has got to mostly come from the men.
Yeah.
My thought has always been, it's got to be men telling other men, you can't do this.
Right.
Now, we all remember when we first had cell phones in our car, we thought nothing of holding the phone and driving.
Right.
And then when that was bad, we thought nothing of texting. Well, now we see somebody doing that, whether the car we're a passenger and somebody does that, we get incensed, or you see somebody else. It's against the law.
Right.
But more than just being against the law, it's become socially unacceptable to do that. And it happened really fast. It's going to have to be a dynamic like that, except, it's...
With all the accidents that happen because of that.
Oh, my gosh.
Lots of them. So what would make this stop?
What would make men go against this human nature thing?
Human nature, you're right.
I have no idea. Except that it's going to have to,
Well, I think, I see a lot more men coming forward with their own stories of abuse.
Yes.
And
that's true.
When they can allow themselves to be seen as vulnerable and, this happened to me.
I think that's true. And that's, it's, because when the Me Too movement started, people were like, well, maybe this will finally get stop men from acting this way. Well, probably not. I think the one thing that might get men to stop acting in that way, or the sexual harassment, or just is to get other men to do to them what they've done to women. Once they experience it themselves, You know,
That's
once
what karma's all about.
that's what karma's all about.
In
yeah.
your next life,
Yes, you're going to see. Going to
the
be.
role will
Yep.
be reversed.
Yeah, the
That's
roles
right.
will be reversed. Reverse the roles. Have them
right.
see what it feels like.
Exactly.
So I don't know. But it will take this critical mass of men saying this is not something. And groups have tried this, you know, and you know, the advertising campaigns. Again, it's kind of an awareness thing, but it's really a cultural mindset thing that it's just
Well-
you don't know what the situation is of the person you're paying money to for sex. So there's people make arguments that if two people make an arrangement and to have an
Right, I think
encounter,
it's a
and
consensual
it's consensual,
agreement, right.
and both have freedom of choice, and there's money exchanged. Is that anybody's business? I don't know. I'm not into that area. I'm into the area of when the person's being forced to do that.
Yeah.
Right, or
like
they've
the
been
children
brainwashed. I
and-
mean, it
yeah.
started so young with
Right, it started young
Yeah.
or started old with drugs.
Right.
And they have to do it to get their next hit, or they have to do it to pay the rent, or they have to do it or they're going to get beat up or whatever. You just don't know. You just don't know that person's situation at all. You know that person's situation as much as you know the checkout person at Walmart when you're checking out. You
Yeah.
know, you just don't know.
You know, the only thing I could ever come up with as an answer, like you said, to make people change is spirituality,
Yeah.
realizing how wrong it is.
Well, I think like once we come to this, you know, we are really all connected. I think once people kind of
Oh, yeah.
make, you know, that leap that, you know, you and I we're part of the same energy. You know, there's a connection that I think because we identify with our body so much, we all feel so separated. But
Exactly.
we're
But
one
how do
big
we do
pool.
that in a culture and an era in which
And that when you hurt
separation and
somebody, you're
conflict-
essentially hurting yourself.
know.
You know, like it's
But we will live in a
Right.
society that is going exactly in the opposite
direction.
It's getting more and more
Exactly.
conflicted,
More and more and more and more.
adversarial.
I see both sides of that because I think there are extremes right now. I think that there's people who, you know, as the darkness has become more prevalent, so is the light. You know, like I see that both of those. I mean, and we just kind of keep having to lift the light. You know,
Yeah,
bring
that's
the
true.
light in.
Well,
you know,
see, to me now, I think that religion, that versus spirituality, religion doesn't have enough to teach you what's really happening, what you're really doing, to give you the answers about life and death.
I understand. Yeah,
You know what I'm
it's like
saying?
a bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Its
it is.
its purpose now is to continue
Yeah,
itself going.
That's
Right.
it. That's just
Yeah.
an organized religion. It's just a man-made business, money-making business, saying, "You don't do this. We'll take care of this for you. We'll get you to heaven.
it gets
We'll
people
get
to
you-
stop thinking for themselves.
Yeah, we'll
right?
get you to heaven. We'll be all right. Get the last right. You're gonna be all right. You know, you don't have to make any amends for what you did.
Yeah.
Just say some prayers, and you got to stop that.
Well,
that's
now
not
even
true.
that's even being rejected by younger generations. You know that.
Well, that's good.
sort of just buying into the religion of their parents or grandparents. You know, they're really just. I mean, the
Oh,
amount.
no,
of
that's not
tr-
good.
It is amazing, and not just the Catholic churches that are closing or merging. Just
There are.
there's so many
Yes.
churches that are closing, that are dying. I talked to a pastor recently that I worked with for years, and about certain dynamics of the church and how they're working. I forgot what the point he made was about. What churches were closing and what programs, large programs that churches were doing were shutting down and not there anymore. And he said, that's because people don't go to church anymore. And it's very true. It's just
But we still need that sense of community. We still need something
I
to come
know.
together and like.
we need it, but
Yeah.
we're separating into tribes now.
Yeah,
so much.
we need it, but that's not the way to have it.
No.
That it is. He's right. You're separating, and you don't have the answers, and everything's fine as long as your life is fine. But have something terrible happen to you, an illness or a loss of a child or something. Where's the answers? Where's
Exactly.
the answers?
Well, I'm just saying there needs to be a community.
There-
Like people need
I-
to come together
Growth
with
of
a different,
spirituality.
I asked
Not
that
religion.
question when I was
Expansion.
speaking in a church here in Connecticut years ago. I'll tell you when it was. And I asked that very question because there were. I was talking to the older folks in the church. I said, "Well, you went through the Depression, World War II. You came back from World War II. You built everything after that, and you've been through all these great challenges." And we were looking at expanding this church, here in Connecticut, and we were announcing we were going to do an expansion program. I said, where's this generation going to go for those answers when their generation's tragedy comes? Are they going to have this place to go to? I said that on September 9th, 2001.
Wow.
So 2 days later,
before.
I got all these calls saying, just this, okay, you said, but here's the other thing. That following Sunday was the highest attendance Sunday, non-holiday, of faith-based organizations, churches, synagogues.
Yeah,
mosques,
well,
since VJ Day, since the end of World War II.
Wow.
But what happened after that? People came in droves. The next week, many of them came back, but within 6 weeks, all of those people were gone.
that's
Well,
right.
they're not getting.
They did
what
not
you
get the
said.
answer.
Right.
No.
They did not get the answer.
You
They were asked for money.
That's right. That's it. And that's the problem. They're leading them farther astray. We talked about awareness. It's not enough to be aware of what's going on. But there's another thing, self-awareness
Yeah.
of yourself.
Self-awareness.
That
Everything.
is the only way to grow. If you don't have any self-awareness, you don't see what's really going on. You don't
That's
understand
hard.
yourself. It's very hard. Yes, it is hard. But it's the only way. It's the
Yeah, I
only
know.
answer to say, what am I doing wrong? What am I doing? What I just said, was that right? No, that wasn't. Taking an inventory every day, things
know.
like that.
Am I
You know,
adding
it
to the
doesn't-
problem or to the solution?
Yes.
Exactly. Yes,
So-
those are hard questions. And is the way I'm living my life or the way I present myself is,
Exactly.
is that really working? Because, if our minds are sort of wired to like order and dislike disorder, so we don't like change. So if we,
No, we
go
don't.
along with the way we're going and we're like, this is the way it is, good or bad, if we look over our shoulder and see something we don't like about ourselves or look in the mirror and it has to change, it's like, oh no, now I have to change, and that's awful.
That's right.
So we just don't look in the mirror.
That's right. You're absolutely right. And until
Outside
that,
I like being
ourselves.
right.
The problem is out there. It's out
Right.
there.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, so blame
Yeah.
everybody else. Blame that group, blame this person, blame this
It
politician.
triggers me.
yeah, exactly.
and as long as that doesn't happen, change is not going
When
to
that
come.
goes away, then I'll be better.
That'll be
But yeah,
better.
that's-
Once
yeah.
these 18 things, happen. And again, like I said earlier, we evolved under this survival mentality. So now I'm of the mind that we sort of create our own survival disasters within ourselves
to see if we can do it.
to see if we can do it, because that's
Prove to
what we're
ourselves.
trained to do in throughout
Yeah.
history. It's so we get addicted to something, or we get in arguments, or we hate this group, or we create these
Yeah.
problems. And we love to watch drama on TV and Real
we do.
Housewives and the way they yell at each other and bicker at each other.
And people, they form these big groups, and they
Yeah.
do these marches, and they all come on and say the same thing, and that's because they want to belong somewhere. It doesn't matter if it's right or wrong.
Belonging is huge.
Just
Belonging
want to
is huge.
belong. Come on, everybody, let's go. You feel that way? You feel that way? Yeah, let's
Yeah,
go.
exactly.
Well, what are you fighting? Oh, well, I don't know. It doesn't matter. We're just together. That's
Exactly.
another thing.
That's how gangs form. That's how
Yeah.
street
Yeah,
gangs
it's
form.
brotherhoods,
That's
yeah.
that's a very strong brotherhood. It's
Yeah.
why people come back from the military and their unit, and they
Yes,
feel empty
and they feel-
inside.
yeah, 'cause they have
because
that
their family,
brotherhood,
while they
right.
love their family,
Exactly.
it isn't that
We went through
closest.
this together.
Well, not only that, but
Yeah.
we survived with you. If it weren't for that person, I'd be dead. I watch their back every moment, every
They
day. They
do.
watch mine. That dependence, that ultra trust. Then you got it back home, and it's like, who's going to take the kids to soccer? That's the biggest thing of the day. There's no, that heightened awareness and mentality and emotional level isn't there anymore.
I see it on TV, watching different shows, like that's, what is it, SWAT.
Yeah.
They've all been Marines, or they've been, and they, where were you? Unit 2, 74th Cavalry, blah, blah, blah. They do that because, they were heroes. They were, you're right, the brotherhood.
Yeah.
And that's what
Which is
everybody,
meaningful. I mean, it's
it is,
why
that's what
they
we're all
sort of-
looking for,
yeah.
the brotherhood of man.
Exactly.
And on that note, we got to say goodnight.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to give the contact information.
Thank
But
you.
before, I want to thank you so much for coming
thank you
again.
for having
and
me again.
we got to have
Yeah,
you some more because
Absolutely.
these conversations are fantastic,
yeah,
aren't they?
definitely.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so we'll give the contact information now. For me, Healing Outside the Box, phone 203-627-7966, email whitebuffalo8@comcast.net, my website, www.rosemaryLaChance.com, and this address is where you will find a lot of your answers, goes along with my Life Explained shows, www.gabrielle-publishing-house.com. Do yourself a favor. You want some answers? Please go on that site. Lots and lots of books there for you to read.
Fantastic. Oh, and this is my information. You can find me, Tracy Crampton, at www.tracycrampton.com. My number is 203-232-3405, or you can email me at tdcrampton@gmail.com.
And now our wonderful guest, Raymond Bechard, www.raymondbechard.com or raymond@raymondbechard.com, which is your email, right?
It sure is, yeah.
And phone number 860-227-4029.
Nice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We say good night.
Wash the journey from your head.